I find today's gospel of Jesus cleansing the temple especially striking, primarily because it's the only place in the Gospels where we hear of Jesus responding with physical action to wrongdoing. I think it reveals a lot about the Lord's zeal for God's house. There's different understanding among Scripture scholars of what specifically Jesus is reacting against when he comes into the temple. And the reason why I say that, on the one hand, the money changers and animal sellers were performing an important role. You see, the Jewish temple prohibited bringing Roman coins, which had Caesar's image on them, into the temple. To bring a pagan image into God's temple was considered a desecration, a sacrilege. And so they were providing this service of providing acceptable coins to people who wanted to make donations in the temple. And similarly, often pilgrims came from a long distance to Jerusalem, and to bring animals along with them was difficult. And so the animal sellers were providing animals to the pilgrims. They could buy them to make sacrifice in the temple. A possibility was that these merchants were charging exorbitant fees to the pilgrims, and so Jesus is reacting against a fleecing of pilgrims in the name of religion. But another possibility, probably what lies at the heart of Jesus' anger, is the place where the merchants were conducting their business. The fact that these activities are taking place within the temple is probably what the Lord is angry about. In other words, people are coming to the temple, the privileged place of encounter with God. They try to get to God and are either hindered physically by these merchants with their tables and their wares, or they're hindered mentally. They can't concentrate on prayer because of all the noise and commotion that's going on. They try to get to the Lord, and they're obstructed by these merchants and their commerce. And so it's difficult, if not impossible, for them to encounter God. For Jesus, the dwelling place of his Father was a house of prayer. And he's angered that the outer court has been turned into a place of commerce. The Lord has a zealous love for his people coming to a relationship with God. And that's probably what motivates his action here. And so Jesus says, as we heard, "Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." And seeing this, his disciples recall a psalm that says, "Zeal for God's house consumes me." And they apply it to Jesus here. The Greek word there for house used in the gospel can refer both to God's house, meaning the physical building, the temple, but it can also refer to God's household. In other words, his people. And so Jesus is zealous in wanting to cleanse his people of everything and anything that hinders their relationship with God. And brothers and sisters, Lent is a yearly reminder for us of this zeal that the Lord has for God's house, his household, for us. That Jesus is doing more here than merely going through the motions or kind of, well, I'm just doing my duty. But he's passionate about our relationship with God. And Lent is an annual celebration, an exhortation for us to be open to this zealous action that the Lord wants to do among us, to remove anything that hinders or obstructs our relationship with God. If anybody here has studied art or knows much about it, of all the many artistic depictions of gospel accounts, probably the cleansing of the temple is one of those that is not very often depicted. But one noteworthy exception to this general trend is El Greco, the famous Greek artist of the 16th and 17th centuries, who did most of his famous work when he lived in Spain. For some reason, he found this story of the cleansing of the temple fascinating. He painted it at least 4 times that we know of. And so his paintings of the cleansing of the temple hang in galleries in Washington, D.C., in London, in Madrid, Spain, and the other place is Minneapolis. And the Minneapolis Institute of Art has one of his 4 paintings of the cleansing of the temple. Each of them is somewhat different than the others. The one I find most kind of compelling, especially for today, was done around 1600. I think it's the one that hangs in London. I find it particularly striking. El Greco places Jesus in the center of the painting. He's clothed in a blazing red robe with light brilliantly reflecting off it, and he's presented as a man of vigorous action and decision, but not somebody with his anger out of control. He has a zeal which is a deliberate response to what is obstructing and disrupting people's relationship with God. So in the middle of the painting, he's got the whip of cords that the gospel mentions in his hand. But what's also striking about the painting is the way that El Greco depicts the reaction of the people around the Lord to what he's doing. There's people on the right of the Lord who for the most part have rent their garments and are moving away. By this, El Greco seems to be symbolizing that these people are ones who have accepted the cleansing that the Lord brings. They're making moves to strip themselves of anything that obstructs their relationship with God. To the left of the Lord are people who are still all very well clothed. They're just kind of observing what the Lord is doing. Probably El Greco is trying to convey that these people are resistant to what the Lord is doing. They see what's happening, but they're unwilling to take steps to do anything in order to respond to the cleansing that the Lord desires to do in their lives. Or at best, some of them are kind of pondering it, and so at best they're content to try to think themselves into goodness, willing to consider it, but not really take any action to make any changes. And finally, there's also a young woman off by herself, also prominent because she's kind of by herself, and she doesn't even seem to notice what is happening. She's kind of passing through blithely through this whole scene. Everybody else responds to Jesus' action, either positively or negatively, except her. Kind of carefree young woman who just moves through the scene. And so the painting comes to mind not only because of its connection with today's gospel, but I also think in many ways it reflects common attitudes towards Lent. Responses, what are the responses people have to the Lord's initiative that he wants to accomplish in Lent? And they can vary like the people in El Greco's painting. Some people are like that woman, who's kind of passing through Lent. Oh, is it Lent? What's Lent? And just kind of move through as if it's any other 40 days. There's other people who realize the Lord is summoning them to make changes, but they reject it or at most just kind of think about it without ever taking any action. And finally, there are people to the Lord's right who actually accept the Lord's changes that he summons them to, and they actually take action to make it happen. So I think brothers and sisters, I think it can be easy in the spiritual life for me to think, well, God's agreeable to my concessions and my feeble excuses about why I don't pursue my relationship with the Lord more easily. And it can be easy to convince myself that the Lord is okay with what I think, yeah, it's good enough, and that's good enough in God's mind. But I think Lent in general, and today's gospel in particular, is meant to be a startling reminder to us that the Lord is zealous for us, that he really does want us to be zealous as well. He doesn't want us to settle for complacency. He wants to accept it when he summons us. Hey, strip away from yourselves whatever is sinful, whatever is obstructing your relationship with God. He really does want us to be living our life as disciples with integrity, conviction, and zeal. And really, for Lent, he summons us for it to be a special time to be active and to take steps to remove from us whatever can be obstructing our relationship with God.